Hey everyone, it's Rob B here with Rob D, and you are listening to the Property Podcast. Now, some strategies do not work in this market, and some are really struggling. And is your strategy on that list? Well, let's find out.
Welcome to the Property Podcast. Thank you for joining us. And yep, this week we're going to be upsetting some people. We might be about to describe your chosen strategy as struggling, past its prime, or just flat out done for. So stick around for that and all the way till the end for Hub Extra, where Rob is sharing a recommendation that's truly changed his life. Let's go on to our news story this week. And you're going to like this one, Rob, because it brings together one of your favourite subjects, railways, and one of your favourite places, Derby. Because Derby has been named the home of the Great British Railways HQ, which means it's beat 5 other locations to become the hub for the nation's railways, which is going to bring more skilled jobs to the area. And this is just one of the developments taking place in Derby. And we had a question on Ask Rob and Rob last week about how to spot an area that's got growth potential. But since recording that, I found another article, which we'll link to in the show notes, that summarises everything that's going on in Derby and everything that's planned. And even if you're not interested in Derby in itself, I think it's really worth looking at because it's a good example of all the things that we're looking for when trying to identify areas that are on the up. Because it's got a mix of government funding, private funding, multiple regional developers choosing to build there, build-to-rent developments being announced, which we said before is a really good sign. So we'll link to this article in the show notes because it's quite a nice blueprint to look for when you're doing your own research into areas with growth potential. Property investment has been around forever and it's going to be around forever. The core business of owning a property asset and renting it out is never going to change. But over time, different strategies come and go. And this is really important to be aware of because now there is so much information out there about investing in property. You can easily come across a piece of advice or somebody talking about something that they did and try to apply it yourself, not realising that something has changed, whether that's in the economy or politically or anything else, that means it just doesn't work anymore. So in this episode, we're going to put different strategies into a few different buckets. We're going to talk about some that still work, but for one reason or another are struggling right now. We're going to talk about some that do kind of work but are past their prime. But we're going to start, Rob, by talking about a couple that flat out just don't work anymore and they're probably not going to work again.
I think this episode might trigger a few people, Rob, because people get absurdly passionate and defensive and partisan over property strategies. And this will annoy people, this section, because some people are just in love with these strategies. And there are other sections that people are getting wound up on as well. And the reason I say that is if you find yourself getting wound up, then use that. Go, okay, am I being defensive? Am I shutting down? Or is there something in this? And maybe you should just have a little bit more of a think. Maybe you should reflect a little more on these strategies because we're saying them for a reason. And with that said, let's dig in and annoy people with lease options. They don't work anymore. So what is a lease option? Well, I'm not going to get into all the details now because one, it doesn't work anymore. And two, it's a little complicated. But what you do is you take an option on a property. And those properties normally are in negative equity. So you go to a vendor, you go to somebody who owns a property and you say, you can't sell this at the moment because it has no equity or it's in negative equity, but I will take an option to buy this property from you at X price. And you find that person, which is not easy, but you find them, and then you agree that price. Then they convince the owner to let them let out in the meantime, so they'll pay the mortgage and let it out. And then they hope that within that option period of time, they're able to get the purchase that they want. But in the meantime, they're making income from the rent. Now, if you've not followed along, don't worry. It's a really messy strategy. It's super niche. But the reason we're mentioning it is because a lot of property trainers out there talk about this strategy because it's a way of potentially getting into property with little or no funds. So therefore, it's peddled a lot. And it didn't work well in the best of times. It was a lot of hard work. It was basically a job to implement. But in this market, it basically doesn't work at all. So I've never been a fan of lease options. For me, the people who've only really won big with lease options are the people selling the training on them. But in this market, they've got the ultimate sales job to do because it wasn't a great strategy in my mind in the first place. And in this market, it doesn't work at all.
No, this is the absolute prime example of a strategy that did work. It was always far harder than it was made out to be, but it did work And now it just doesn't. Or if you can, by some miracle, find a way of pulling off one of these, it'll take you so long and be so hard, you'd have been far better off just trying something else in the first place. So lease options, until and unless there's a gigantic change in the economy, don't work and aren't going to work again. Something else that doesn't work anymore, that used to be commonplace, is aggressive refinancing. So back in the pre-crash days, you could refinance incredibly aggressively. You could even take out a mortgage and remortgage on the same day to recognise an increase in the value of the property. You could even, for a while, buy a property, take out a mortgage, remortgage on the same day for more than you paid for the property, and pull out some tax-free cash. Sounds insane, but it worked for a while. But even at a less aggressive level, it used to be very common to pull money out of a property every time its value went up. And this isn't the same as adding value to a property and then refinancing it. We'll talk about that later. But let's just say the market lifts the value of your property by £20,000. You then go, oh great, 20 grand, refinance to a higher level, take that money out and use that to expand your portfolio. In principle, you can still do that, but the introduction of mortgage stress tests make that much harder. Because if you wanted to, in that example, increase your mortgage by £20,000 so you could take that money and use it towards another deposit, the lender would then look at the amount of rent that property is bringing in and go, okay, well, if you want that extra money, the property needs to be producing this much more rent. So a lot of the time, you might have a property that started at 75% loan to value, fell to, say, 65, giving you the potential to refinance and still have an acceptable loan to value ratio. But because of the rental stress test, the property isn't producing enough rent for you to be able to refinance. So there's a distinction to be made here between refinancing and aggressive refinancing, because time, of course, will raise not just the value of your property, but the value of your rental income stream as well. So you will still be able to pull more money out of your portfolio over the longer term. But being in the habit of extending your mortgage every year or every couple of years to get another deposit, it used to be commonplace. It's something that I've done. It's something you've probably done as well, but it doesn't work anymore.
So we've got more categories to come up. The next category is struggling at the moment. So what strategies are struggling right now in this market? Well, flipping. Flipping is buying a property, often doing it up, but not always, and then flipping it for more money. It's really tough to make that work in a market that's this slow. Transactions are down, people are cautious, and because people are cautious, people are also looking for deals. There's not a lot coming onto the market. So buying with the expectation to be able to flip it in a short period of time and make a capital gain on that is super, super tough. It might not be impossible, because you could just get the deal of a century and maybe you're able to hold long enough that the market recovers a little bit. And yes, that could absolutely happen. So it's not doesn't work at all, but I would put it under really struggling at the moment, like really, really struggling. It's super hard to make this strategy work. So if you're somebody who flips properties or wants to in the short term, maybe look at adapting in the short term into something else, because this is a really difficult strategy to execute.
And the same could be said for developing property or converting property. So building something from the ground up, or taking, say, a former office building and converting it into flats. This is not something where the world has changed, it's never going to work anymore. This is, again, something that will be around forever. But at the moment, it is really hard. Partially, it's hard because of your exit. So, of course, when the market is slow, it's going to be harder to shift the units that you've created and to do so at the price that you need to make your numbers stack up. But it's also because materials and labour are so expensive. Both of those costs have absolutely rocketed over the last few years, and they are both calming down. The pace of increase is slowing down. But because materials have gone up in cost so much, and because it's so hard to find people, these strategies are currently struggling. If you're in this world already, you've lived through this, you've probably got the skills and the contacts and the ability to work your way around it. And like I said, it does now seem to be starting to ease. But starting with that strategy right now is not an easy thing to do. We love sharing our knowledge with thousands and thousands of people on this podcast, but sometimes it's nice to have a smaller group as well. And that's what Property Hub Select is all about. With Property Hub Select, we're able to put on extremely high quality, exclusive in-person events and interactive online masterclasses that helps our ambitious members approach property investment on a whole different level. And the best thing is, Property Hub Select costs nothing at all. It's all free for our clients. So to find out if it could be right for you, just visit propertyhub.net/select.
So let's get to the bit that's going to cause fireworks. Let's get to the section that I know is going to get the most reaction. And this section we're calling Past Their Prime. So these strategies have been super popular in the past, even very recently. But the shine is off them a bit. And maybe the shine isn't off them forever, but because of current market conditions, they are past their prime. They're not as glamorous as they once were. So as I put my tin hat on and start to take cover, the first on our list is HMOs. It felt like everybody you spoke to a few years ago said they wanted to do HMOs, whether they were starting out in property or they were a seasoned professional. The people who had absolutely no experience just used to spout out, I want to do HMOs, even without fully understanding the hard work that goes into doing this strategy. Now, you could be forgiven for shouting out right now, going, wait a minute, rents are up and rental demand is high, so HMOs surely is a good strategy. And that is absolutely the case. Acknowledge that completely. But a lot of people who piled in are looking for those high yields have started to come back out because of interest rates being so high right now. And also the regulation year on year, it's not something in the last few weeks, but just gets tighter and tighter. And with licensing and all the other restrictions that you have of HMO, it's not an easy strategy to implement. It never was easy because you're looking after multiple tenants at once. But the rewards were there to justify the work. But the rewards aren't there now. Certainly nowhere near as much as they used to be. And because of that, we're definitely seeing, in our experience, people moving out of that market and HMOs coming onto the market and HMOs being sold, whether that's as a HMO in its current state or to turn it back to a one residential unit. There is that trend. Now, does that mean HMOs are dead forever? No, this category is called past their prime. But it'd be hard for anybody to argue right now that HMOs are having a great time of it, because they're not.
No, HMOs can, of course, work. But what we're saying is that the great HMO boom of a few years ago is definitely over and, like Rob said, reversing. Another strategy that's past its prime is student lets, or at least the traditional idea of a student let. So when I was at uni, I lived in a grotty house with 6 other people. That's what most people did. And there are still a lot of student lets around that are just a big house, rented out room by room, and where not much is done in the way of improvements or maintenance or refurbishment year to year because, well, they're students. They're probably going to mess it up again, and they're not all that picky. I've even owned properties like that in the past, and I sold them quite a while ago because I could see the way that things were going, which is that students are getting more picky. Which makes sense because they're paying a lot of money to be there now. So the whole mindset and attitude towards being a student has changed. And you're seeing students move not just into purpose-built blocks, but also into what you'd call the mainstream private rented sector. So moving into a 2 or 3 bedroom city centre flat, for example. And you're especially seeing overseas students moving into the luxury PRS sector. And what that means is that those areas of towns that were dominated by student properties, and you see them in Nottingham, Leeds, Liverpool, wherever there's a big student population, those areas are now full of student properties that just aren't very nice. No one's invested in very much, and no students really want to live there anymore. So can letting to students still work as a strategy? Yes, of course it can. But the type of accommodation, and to some degree the location of that accommodation, needs to be radically different from what it was.
But if you are in the student market, it's not like the corporates who have the student blocks are winning. Like Rob said, the competition is coming from the main market, the main rental market. And we're seeing lots of professional student blocks being sold as well right now. So you're not the only ones feeling the pain. Another group of people feeling the pain, or beginning to feel more pain at least. And remember, this is past their prime. This is not strategies that are dead, in this section at least anyway, which is holiday lets. Because a few years ago, you had it really good. The competition was low. There wasn't that many people in your sector. Then we had COVID. Then we had a holiday boom domestically. And suddenly, everybody got on the holiday lets train. And people were buying holiday lets up left, right and centre. And also people were converting their traditional buy-to-lets into holiday lets. So you had that boom phase. And for a while, the supply that came onto the market could be met because of extreme demand. But trends are changing. Yes, people still holiday in the UK. They always have and they always will. But because of international travel opening up again, people aren't restricted to just being in the UK. There are now a lot more people competing in this market. But that's not it. It hasn't happened yet. But it's almost nailed on that the government's going to get involved in this sector soon because of the size it's become. It's got their attention. And legislation is going to follow. I'd lay money on it. I'm surprised it hasn't happened already. And I know that annoys people when we talk about that because we've had emails in. but it's just going to happen whether you like it or not, just like it has with other property investment sectors. So with more competition and more legislation to come, it means that holiday lets are certainly past their prime. They can still work, and the best people operating in this market are doing very well. It's the people who are average in this market who are going to struggle. And that's pretty much the same with whatever you do in life. If you are average, then you probably will struggle when things get a little tougher. And if you're the best at what you do, or you strive to be at the best at what you do, then you'll be fine. So it's not to say everybody listening to this who does holiday lets is going to suffer, because chances are, if you listen to a podcast which is focused on property and you're in this sector, you clearly are dedicated to your craft. And that's brilliant. So possibly you listening in the holiday let sector may be fine. But it's all those who've come in just because it seemed like an easy, quick win who are going to suffer.
So if those strategies are past their prime, what's evergreen? What's working now in the current market and is always going to work no matter what happens? Well, the first is adding value to a property. So if you can go in, buy a property, get it at a good price because it needs work doing to it, and you can find a way of cost effectively doing that work, improving the property, and therefore increasing its value by more than you put in, that is always going to be a winning strategy. There are going to be times when it's easier and when it's harder. So at the moment, it's probably a bit harder for the reason that developments are a bit harder because you've had significant inflation in materials and it's very hard to find the labour. But it still works. And if you've got a team that you work with already, then that's great. It's probably also a bit harder at the moment if you want to actually realise the increase in value by pulling your money back out because the market is a bit weaker at the moment. Therefore, surveyors are going to be more cautious about giving you the uplift. But the flip side of that is that in a way, it's actually a pretty good market for this at the moment. Because it's a quieter market, you're going to be able to go and get those properties at a better price than you otherwise would because there aren't so many other bidders in the market. And you're going to have a fair bit of pretty tired stock coming up for sale. We've spoken recently, for example, about landlords exiting the market at the moment. And not just any landlords, but the ones who've been in the game for 20 plus years. They've had a good run and now they've decided it's time to get out. A significant proportion of those people won't have invested in their property much over recent years. Therefore, there'll be the potential to go in and whether it's just a quick refurb, whether it's reconfiguring it, upgrading, extending it in some way, there's going to be that potential to add value. So that approach is never going anywhere because it's providing a useful function, right? It's going in, doing some work and reaping the rewards of that work. So adding value as a strategy is evergreen. As of course is long-term buy and hold. As I said at the start, it's the oldest game there is. And unlike student lets or holiday lets, which are niche markets where trends come and go and things change, this is in the main market, the mainstream, the biggest market there is, where something absolutely radically dramatic would need to happen at a very big level to end up in a situation where there's not going to be a demand for that product.
Now, I know some people listening to this will be going, all right, guys, that's what you guys do. So, of course, you've put it in this category. But you have to remember, this is the vanilla strategy. The long-term buy and hold is never the sexy one. It's the vanilla. But, you know, the great thing about vanilla is it goes well with nearly everything. You know, whatever dessert you have, vanilla ice cream pretty much works. It's great. It may not be the most exciting dessert you ever have or the exciting ice cream flavour, but it just works. And that's the whole point of this. In some market conditions, there are strategies you can adapt that will outperform the long-term buy and hold, without question. But if you just want something that works over the long term, then your vanilla long-term buy and hold works. You know, Rob and I are quite a bit vanilla. We love a bit of vanilla. Bore us up. We are all on the boring train because property, even on the boring train, is quite rocky and exciting, and you get enough action even in the boring strategies. For us, we're happy in there. You can go and get excitement elsewhere in your life. Go jet skiing or paragliding or wherever you want. But for us, the long-term buy and hold is why we do it. Is there some bias? Of course, I'm sure there is. But it's hard to argue against that it works in every stage of the market cycle and performs admirably over the long term.
So maybe we've offended a few people in this episode. I'm sure you may disagree with some of our distinctions. And if you do, by the way, you can write in. We're on all the socials at Property Hub UK. But there's still time for Hub Extra. There's still time to give you something that makes your life a little bit better. And maybe still time to offend some people. Because, Rob, this time you brought something along on an emotionally charged hot button issue. Taps.
Yes, taps. I'm going to defend this choice. I'm going to get you all on board. Because it's the little things in life that make a big difference. Now, you may be quite comfortable boiling a kettle, and that's fine. And so was I. I was one of you. I was one of you people. But no longer. No longer. I go to my tap and I get instant hot water. And the difference that makes in my life, the happiness it brings me, is probably absurdly irrational. But it just makes me happy that if I want a cup of tea or a cup of coffee, I'm so much quicker than ever before to that happy place. So I'm going to go a level up here, because if you've not got a hot tap, I'd highly recommend it. And everybody I speak to who's having their kitchen done, I say to them, make sure you get yourself an instant hot water tap. And then they have things like water filters as well with them as well, which is all lovely. But I'm going to double down. I'm going to make this extra valuable, because nearly everybody goes for the main big brand when they get their hot tap. I think it's pronounced Kuka with a Q, Q-U-O-O-K-E-R. And they're fine. They're good. And I know people who have them and use them. But when shopping around, I like to get myself a deal. So I took a little bit of a chance and I went for a brand, and this is over a year ago now, and it's worked well ever since, so I can endorse it. Luso Stone. They also do boiling water taps. Now, you may know them for their bath and tap ranges, and that's what they're mostly known for, Luso Stone. But they also do a range of taps, and they are about half the price. And I've shared this with people who are doing refurbs, high-end refurbs, or building their own homes, and they're loving this. And a builder who helped do our kitchen now uses this brand after installing ours. So I'd say this is Hub Extra worthy, because not only have I given you a little life hack, but I've also given you a way to get a better deal.
There you go. After 500 and something episodes, we've uncovered the secret of Rob's incredible productivity. He does not wait around for a kettle to boil. Well, that is us done for this week. Thank you so much for joining us. Next week is not going to be the tap recommendations special. We'll wait around and see what the response was to that section before we commit to the full episode. But we will be back next Thursday with another fantastic episode. And if you're not already following the show on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, do put that right, because then every episode will get sent straight to your device. Until then, have a great week. We'll see you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.